Hi everyone, I'm Brennan from Life Changing Coaching, and I'm here today with Coach Paul for our next installment on the Myers-Briggs personality types. So today we're going to be talking about sensing and intuiting. So, Coach Paul, how do I know whether I'm a sensor or intuitor?
The sensing and intuiting dichotomy are the first of what we call our decision-making patterns. When we make decisions, we use information, and the kinds of information we use really help us determine what kind of decisions we make. And so when we look at this sensing versus intuiting pattern, this is really about decision making and about that first step in decision making. Sensors, when they make decisions, they need details. They need things that are tangible, things that are measurable, things that are happening. So when you ask a sensor about a decision, a sensor is going to want to check in on what's currently happening or what happened in the past. Sensors love polls. They love surveys. They love to know what people are doing now and what people used to do. Versus intuitors, they don't really care about what people are doing now or what people used to do. What they want to know is what people could do. What are the possibilities? So they get excited about kind of the future. They don't really need to be anchored into reality. That's why you'll see one of the differences between sensors and intuitors is what kinds of books they read. Intuitors tend to read novels that are science fiction, fantasy, more creative. Whereas sensors, they like historical novels or they like thrillers that are grounded in reality. They tend to look at intuitors as being a little bit too high in the clouds, whereas intuitors tend to look at sensors as being a little too stuck in reality. And so because this is about decision making, it's often confused about, that becomes something personal, but really it isn't. It's about the first step in decision making. Sensors, when they're making decisions, they need sensory information. Intuitors, when they're making decisions, they need intuitive information. That's going to cause a lot of difference in how they behave, how they interact, but it really is about that decision-making process.
How does sensing or intuiting affect our daily lives?
In daily living, sensors and intuitors are going to look very much the same because at the end of the day, it's the behaviors that are going to be very similar. What's going to be different is kind of the patterns and the thoughts and feelings behind those behaviors. So for example, a sensor will be looking for that, again, concrete information. So in their daily life, a sensor will be looking at things that are tangible. They're going to be more apt to pay attention to the present. So if they're in conversations, they're going to be talking about things that are today that actually happened or yesterday that actually happened, either present or history. Whereas when you're talking and interacting with intuitors, because they have this bigger picture orientation where their information is less tangible, they're going to be talking about things that tend to be oriented toward the future. So their thoughts and their feelings are going to be oriented toward the future. They're going to be thinking about things that may happen, things that might happen, things that are to come. And so it's interesting when you're in a conversation with a sensor and an intuitive, the sensor is really going to be focused on talking about what's happening now or what happened in the past, whereas the intuitor will be talking about what could happen in the future. I always use this example of a pen. When you're talking about a pen and a sensor's talking to you, the sensor's talking about the actual pen that is in his or her hand, what it looks like, what it feels like, whereas the intuitor's thinking, what can I do with pens? Will pens be around in the future? Can I write with my fingers? Can I just write with my brain? Things like that. And so that's how it's going to affect the daily life. Behavior-wise, you're still going to be in a discussion, but what you focus on and what you think about and feel, they're going to be two different kinds of things based on that information that you're gathering.
What are some common career choices for sensors and intuitors?
That's another great question. Sensors tend to prefer careers that allow them to focus on that information that they gather. So they like careers that allow them to focus on sensory information, information that's detailed, information that's specific, information that's about the present or the past. So you're going to find a lot of sensors in K through 12 education, for example, because that is about teaching people how to read, write, spell, count, teaching people about history, teaching about biology, chemistry, those hard sciences, where they're actually looking at what's happening in today's world or in yesterday's world. Intuitors, on the other hand, if you look at them, they're going to want to focus on those careers that allow them to think about the future. So they're going to be a lot more theoretical. That's where you're going to find a lot of Intuitors in education, in the higher education. So you're going to find the sensors, K through 12, you're going to find the Intuitors in higher education. Another focus will be, you look at leadership. Intuitors love leadership. They focus on kind of the bigger visionary aspects of leadership, whereas sensors will focus on management. They like that focus, that detailed perception of what's really going on. And so that's kind of a sense of careers that are going to be focused on each of the two patterns. Sensors will like to use that sensory information. Intuitors will like to use that intuitive information.
How does being a sensor or intuitor affect our communication style?
Sensors tend to communicate with precision. So they will use words like black, white, 2 inches, 3 o'clock, 3:15, 3:16. Intuitors tend to use a lot more broader language. So they'll use words like dark, light, 3 o'clock-ish, around 3. So it's not nearly as concrete and specific. Their communication tends to be a lot broader. So sensors will be very specific in their communication because they are, again, focusing on those details. If you're asking a sensor how he or she is doing, he or she is going to give you specific characteristics of how he or she is doing. They'll say, I'm feeling fantastic because this is happening, my blood pressure is low, this is going on, versus an intuitor will be just one word, I'm great, or I'm a mess, or I'm lousy. A lot more broader, a lot more non-specific. Sensors and intuitors have a lot of communication conflicts, particularly when they don't understand the needs that each other has for their communication. I'll tell the story about when I was working at Washington Mutual. I had a boss who was a sensor, and I'm an intuitor. And so first day, first meeting, he asked me, how's my division doing? And I had 7 departments, and I said, great. He looked at me like I had cursed in church. And for the next 2 hours, he proceeded to grill me about asking specific questions. What do you mean by great? How is this doing? What is this doing? What does your productivity look like? What is this happening? And every question he asked, I felt he didn't trust me. And every answer I gave that was intuitive, he felt I was hiding something. So we had this conflict going on in this conversation, and it took 2.5 hours, and it was a painful 2.5 hours. After I left that meeting, I was very frustrated, and then the light bulb went on. He's a sensor. I'm an intuitive. He needs detailed information. So what I did for our next meeting was I prepared a binder that had every specific, tangible, measurable detail about my division, about those 7 departments in it. All the questions he could think about were answered. So I presented this binder to him at our next meeting. He asked how things were going. I said, well, turn to page 2, let's look at this. Turn to page 7, let's look at this. Turn to page 9, let's look at this. We've summarized this. We've categorized this. It took 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Because he had all the sensory, detailed information that he wanted. That's the key. Sensors need to know that intuitors will speak in more broader terms. So if you're trying to talk to an intuitor, don't dive into the details. That tends to bore them. On the other hand, intuitors need to know sensors need details. So don't leave things broad if you want to talk effectively with a sensor.
How does being a sensor or intuitor affect our learning style?
That's another good question. One of the things that research is showing us is that our learning styles are tied to our personality patterns. So sensors, they tend to be auditory learners. They tend to want to hear what's going on. Whereas intuitors tend to be visual and kinesthetic learners. They tend to want to see and interact with the material. Now there is a handful of sensors that are kinesthetic, but most of them tend to be auditory. So they want to hear what's going on, and then they tend to write. They tend to take very precise notes. They tend to write down specifics about things, whereas sensors or intuitors, they tend to use broader terms. So they'll just write down concepts, they'll write down thoughts, they'll write down feelings. Those will then become trigger points for their memory as they are learning. So those are kind of the two big differences between them in learning.